As we delve into this story, I want you to think a little bit about what the experience of being a refugee is. Or, if you are a refugee, to remember what it was like to leave everything you knew because your life was in danger, to come to a brand new place where you didn't know the language, you didn't know the culture, and you just tried to make a life for yourself. Now imagine you're a refugee coming to America, let's say Texas, and you're starting to rebuild your life. You have a home, you have a family, you have a profession that you did back in your home country, in this case, catching shrimp and crabs and fish. And you decide to start picking it up again, doing the same business. You fought for freedom, you fought for capitalism, and that's the reason you're here. So let's go out into the marketplace and make ourselves valuable. And, well, the people start turning on you. The host country starts accusing you of cavorting with the enemy being the people who caused you to move to the other side of the world. But they don't just start turning against you. They start threatening you, committing assault against you, threatening your family. I want you to know that while the story is about the building of the white power movement, there's a whole group of people, of refugees, who are made victims. And just imagining the horror story of that experience through their eyes. Because this is a story of a lot of refugees. This is the story of the Central American person trying to escape from gang violence only to be accused of being a member of a gang when they come to the country that they're settling in. This is the story of Syrian refugees who escaped a war against a dictator who was gassing his own people, only to arrive in Germany and have people associate them with ISIS. And that's only if, a group of white nationalists don't try to sink your boat while you're trying to cross the Mediterranean. These moments of tension where there is a racist backlash against a group of refugees or just any racial tensions whatsoever are abused by the far right. It's called Entryism, trying to use different wedge issues to recruit people and get them into a racist cause. Today we're going to talk about the Vietnamese refugee situation that was on the coast of Texas in the late 70s, early 80s. But first, this video doesn't have a sponsor, so I just want to give a quick shout out to my Patreon, patreon.com/stepbackhistory. And also, if you haven't checked it out, this channel has kind of blown up in the last few weeks. Tristan Won't Shut Up, my second YouTube channel. If you are interested in the things I'm talking about that are not history, I definitely hope that you check it out. Hi, I'm Tristan. Welcome to Step Back History. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notifications to never miss a new Step Back video. And I know that one question that's immediately going to come to mind. Wait a minute. Didn't you cover this before in a video you made only a few weeks ago? The answer to that is yes, but I only made it a section of a video. I didn't anticipate how popular the thing was going to get, and so I'm going to be elaborating a lot more on different subjects. And this one specifically was one I felt a little uncomfortable glossing over as merely a section of a video instead of talking about the video itself. Plus, I have a little bit of a new angle to take. So to rewind and get you the story about what's going on in the white power movement. Louis Beam, who is a founding figure of the militia movement, the white power movement, whatever you want to call it, came home from Vietnam as a veteran. So he tried to take his military training from Vietnam and use it to train an army of white supremacists in America in order to fight communism. But eventually, it quickly morphed into killing people of color and creating a white supremacist ethno-state. So here's the thing. Beam was trying to train a section of the Ku Klux Klan that he was managing in order to get ready for the big race war. But he couldn't just declare war on the government right away. Instead, he framed his early actions, his paramilitary training and getting ready, as a continuation of the Vietnam War, the greater war against communism. And through the, racist lens of anti-communism, his way of attacking communism was to go after Asian people on the coast of Texas, specifically in Galveston Bay, where tensions were rising between the Vietnamese refugee community and the white people who live there. Originally, Vietnamese refugees arriving in America was seen with excitement. These were the people who were helping the Americans fight the communists in Vietnam, and they were heroes of the anti-communist movement. But as the 1970s started to see economic stagnation, the refugee community started to become a target of blame for people's economic misfortunes. Many of these refugees came to America because they either helped the United States or fought against the North Vietnamese. And then when the North Vietnamese won the war, they were worried about receiving retribution for what they did, so many of them moved to America. And in this case, many of the people who moved to Galveston Bay were trained as fishermen, as shrimpers, as crab catchers, and so they decided to get into the business of catching seafood. These Vietnamese refugees moved in with family members, they pooled their money to buy fishing boats, and managed to get a decent amount of them, despite the fact that all of the prices they paid were hyperinflated because a racist rumor started going around that the Vietnamese had brought gold over from Vietnam and they were secretly all wealthy, sometimes like double the price of the actual boat. That was usually very low quality. And there was some initial friction between the norms and laws surrounding fishing in Vietnam versus fishing in America. So there was some like legitimate reasons to, step in and try and have conversations, because what the Vietnamese were doing when it came to the norms of trapping and fishing were a little out of tune with the norms and laws associated with America. But as local officials have said under oath, that this was a very short period of time, and as soon as they really understood the rules of how to fish in America, they were fine. They broke the law, in fact, less than the white fishers. And also, who could blame them? Many of these refugees who came didn't really know that much or any English. So the language barrier alone made learning a whole bunch of fishing regulations just a little bit difficult. But here's the thing that really made these refugees unacceptable to the white population. They were better at catching fish and shrimp and crab than their white counterparts. They worked harder. They outcompeted the white people in the free market, capitalism. So because they were better at catching shrimp than their white counterparts instead of, getting good, because I've been told by conservatives that, competition in markets are good universally. There's no bad side to it whatsoever. But these, free market loving pro-capitalist people decided that no, this was not the case. They were not going to outcompete their new friends. They were going to threaten them and, try to drive them out of town. But where things first turned violent was a disagreement between Vietnamese fishers and a white fisher over the location of a trap. Things turned violent. There was a gunshot, and the white fisherman was shot in self-defense by a Vietnamese refugee. And I'm not just making that up. The people on the ground who investigated did confirm that it was self-defense. But after that, all bets were off. False rumors started to spread that the Vietnamese refugees were bringing over secret gold, that they were somehow welfare cheats. And all of this started getting picked up by white supremacist newspapers. One, for example, would be the Thunderbolt, which is a white power periodical that decided to spread these rumors and make up a few of their own. So what they did was take the story of these Vietnamese refugees, all these racist rumors, and mix it with the sort of stabbed in the back Vietnam narrative that had been growing after the Vietnam War by right-wing, white power adjacent Vietnam veterans. And periodicals like the Thunderbolt sort of merged these two together to show this, dispute over norms having to do with catching shrimp, and saw it as a continuation of the Vietnam War, that these people were the Viet Cong because they were also from Vietnam, I guess, and that because of that, this was a war against communism all over again. Periodicals like the Thunderbolt started to spread the rumor that the Vietnamese refugees who had come because they were, either members of the South Vietnamese army or in some way helped the Americans and were afraid of North Vietnamese reprisal, that somehow the Viet Cong were starting to sneak into the country with them, which, again, if you probably remember, is not an unfamiliar story, with threats of ISIS somehow sneaking into America through the southern border, which is wow. And, seeing these Vietnamese refugees as some sort of invading threat and not just, part of the natural consequence of America having a globe-spanning, never-ending empire. And a little bit later, these refugees started to get American citizenship. And something about that started to make the violence escalate even more. Both the boats and homes of Vietnamese shrimpers were firebombed. Vietnamese shrimpers were regularly beaten up, shot at, had beer bottles thrown at them, and all along the way, white power people, Nazis, KKK members, were trying to stoke this fire to make it even more violent so they can get their race war that they're trying to, will into existence. They wrote about Vietnamese refugees with old racist tropes, talking about like boat people who are bringing disease. They're going to commit acts of sexual assault against white women, which is a thing that happens a lot in American history, which I think, should be its own video sometime. And even mainstream media covering this used Vietnam War rhetoric and tried to exacerbate the differences between these groups of people rather than try to write about how they're not all that different. And then, the professional racist publications would push that even further, like David Duke trying to stir up hatred by saying that the Vietnamese refugees were eating people's pets, or other dehumanization that you've probably seen in recent refugee situations, like referring to them as a plague or a flood. But what was most effective in this late 70s, early 80s period was the accusation that these refugees were welfare cheats. This is around the time that the new right, the kind of Ronald Reagan crowd, was trying to drum up a, again, racially charged hatred of people who receive welfare. So trying to pin welfare recipient on Vietnamese refugee was just a really potent combination. And in a time where the right-wing ideology is very anti-government, to frame the Vietnamese refugees as sort of wards of the state really, drummed up more hatred. Eventually, this spilled over to not just fishermen or, shrimpers, but it moved to their communities and their homes. Vietnamese families started receiving threatening phone calls, which would include threats against them and their children. And more reports started showing up in the Galveston Bay area of Vietnamese shrimping boats being set on fire and the assailants escaping in Klan robes. And because the police did not respond to the racist backlash against Vietnamese refugees who were doing nothing wrong, the KKK and white power groups started to use this lack of a reaction in order to attack the government and drum up more hatred and get more support and do entryism into their movement. So, how did they do that? Well, they held a big-ass rally in Santa Fe. 300 to 400 people showed up, and one of the things they did at the rally was burn in effigy a big boat labeled the USS Viet Cong. They threatened the government, saying that unless the government kicked the Vietnamese shrimpers off of the coast before the beginning of the shrimping season on May 15th, that there would be consequences. In that time leading up to that, we saw an increase in white fishers starting to take paramilitary training from some of these Ku Klux Klan paramilitary training camps. And the KKK started launching boat patrols of the region, where boats were seen going up and down the coast looking for any Vietnamese fishers who were, fishing. These boat patrols would obviously be heavily armed, and on the rigging of these boats, they would hang up the effigy of a lynched Vietnamese man. And this intimidation was in some ways successful. In 1981, a group of Vietnamese fishermen representing about 69 boats wrote a letter saying that if the people of the coastal communities were willing to buy back all of their ships, they were willing to move and to never fish ever again. But if you remember, they sold the boats to these Vietnamese refugees at hyperinflated prices, so many white fishers couldn't afford to buy the boats back. So, for the most part, these Vietnamese refugees stuck around and kept fishing. The more successful response was that the Vietnamese refugees got organized. They founded a group called the Vietnamese Fishers Association, and with the help of the Southern Poverty Law Center, launched a harassment suit against the Ku Klux Klan. They appealed to the FBI. They pointed out that they were in legitimate danger due to all of the paramilitary camps set up around the state training Ku Klux Klan members. And so at this harassment trial, that's when it came out that game warden pointed out that the Vietnamese refugees were no more rule breakers than any of the white fishermen. And in fact, as his report, they committed way fewer crimes. So this conclusively proved this was not about the Vietnamese, breaking the rules. This was a xenophobic, racist attack against Vietnamese people. During the trial, when VFA members came to testify, KKK members came and took photos of them as a way of intimidation of witnesses. Their cameras were confiscated, but the damage was done. And because of the SPLC's media strategy, the country at large started to become aware that the KKK was undergoing paramilitary training in Texas. They showed video evidence that the KKK was getting paramilitary training, which was against the law. There was a law in Texas in the books that anybody but the state troopers were not allowed to undergo military training. And at the end of the trial, the judge launched an injunction against the KKK saying that they were not allowed to do gatherings and that they were not allowed to assault and harass Vietnamese fishers. He received a whole bunch of hate mail for it, but it worked. This case also led to further injunctions against paramilitary training, and it led to them working out a new system of shrimping regulations in order to keep people from overfishing. After the trial, federal and state troops showed up to these camps to shut them down. However, the attention works both ways, and by the time these camps were shut down in Texas, they had already been popping up around the country. Louis Beam realized that the state wasn't going to come and assist him when doing a racist tirade against Vietnamese refugees, so the state was going to be the enemy, and they would have to find new tactics, which led into the events of the video I made on leaderless resistance. I wanted to return to this topic not only because these kinds of situations pop up all the time between racialized minorities and white racist majorities, but that it's used by the far right, by fascists, as a way to recruit people into their cause. A recent example I wanted to draw attention to happened this year, actually not even that long ago, in my country of Canada, in Nova Scotia. In September of this year, a group of Micmac fishermen who had gotten some special dispensations for fishing off season started a lobster catchery in their, designated home territory. Racist white lobster catchers saw this as competition and proceeded to launch a campaign of terror against the indigenous Micmac people. This led to many different acts of vandalization, but a lobster pound owned by the Micmac fishery was burned down, and the surviving lobsters were poisoned. And without much government response, Justin Trudeau and the federal government did a sort of both sidesy response. The only real support has come through various boycotts, and to this day, we're still talking about how to deal with boycotting of Nova Scotia's lobster, and the situation's kind of resolved through a sort of corporate merger that happened, but this was still a racist flare-up against the indigenous people of my country. But I think the main point we need to take away is that white supremacists use these kinds of situations to recruit, and that when there is racist flare-ups, tensions between different communities, we need to be getting in there, we need to be helping, because the far right is going to amplify rumors, they're going to make up stuff in order to make these communities seem like they have less in common than they actually do. So, speak up against xenophobia and racist hatred whenever it shows up, because when society is quiet on a situation, that's when the racists are able to capitalize on it. We'd be in a very different situation if counter-protesters hadn't showed up at Charlottesville. Just saying. If you want to keep following along with the story, please check out my White Power series that I'm working through. There's a link somewhere. And take care of yourselves, and see you all in 2021.